Mute that over there. All right, guys. So I'm going to try to monitor chat, both in the Zoom client. If you've got the Zoom thing opened up and you're on there, you can chat back and forth with me by hitting the chat button. It'll pop a window out the side. I'm also going to kind of try to keep an eye on the Facebook stream because I know some people just watch this in the stream as opposed to jumping on the actual Zoom call. So happy Thanksgiving. This whole week I've been kind of in the sharing and festive mood, and certainly the thankful mood, right? There have been a lot of things that I've been, um, grateful for, but really fortunate. A lot of luck has come my way. I think that's probably the case for a lot of people. A lot of good luck does happen. A lot of bad luck does happen. But what we really want to talk about with kind of this concept of Fletcher's Garage, right, is uncovering failure conditions that you've got in your life and kind of in the periphery of things. Most of the traditional, I that's completely ridiculous to even say most of the traditional. There's a lot of kind of pop culture, like motivation is the way to success type of kind of mantras and mindset and things like that. That does have an effect. You can get yourself motivated, right? And do some more, but then what happens when the motivation runs out? It's like you got to go back and watch the video, or you got to go back and reconnect with whatever it was that was, that triggered getting excited and getting motivated. So this might sound a little weird. It might not. I think a lot of people probably can relate to it, at least in some way. Um, but there have been a lot of times in my life where I was not, um, got a tickle in my throat. Hang on a second. Um, where I was not particularly motivated to do things um, that were like good for me. Just say that, right? So there were times when I didn't go work out the way I should have and exercise. There were times when I ate food that I probably shouldn't have eaten. There were times when I didn't pay attention to some of the important things in my business the way that I needed to, and those limited how much impact and income and people I could help with what I was doing. And so with Fletcher's Garage, what we're really trying to do is to properly understand things so that those contradictions really get resolved, because you know they just they're like landmines all over the place, and more than line, they're almost like prisons that we think we're not in. I know there's a movie with Jim Carrey. I can't remember the name of it, but like he grows up and his entire life is actually a TV show, right? He was kind of born on this show, and they just turned it into this big dome, and he goes around living, and it's like a reality TV show where everyone realizes it's a reality TV show except for him. And one of the things I've been working about, and tonight what we're going to specifically talk about is money, okay? Um, because there's a lot of reasons for it, but going back and talking a little bit more about kind of my backstory, I guess I in my 20s was in renewable energy development. And I was in that as in the capacity of doing something called geographic information systems. So I was analyzing, you know, well, the United States, frankly, the entirety of the United States. I had geodetic data, information about the land in different layers, and you could lay them on top of each other. So you could understand where it was windy, and then you could lay over that a map of population centers so that we could find places that were windy that had low population, and then we could lay over that parcel map so we can understand that certain places had very large parcels of land that were windy, that were not occupied by a lot of population, and then we're also near population because we had to get the wind energy to you know um, the places where that energy would be used, that electricity would be used. And so what I really kind of wound up doing was feasibility studies for wind energy developers. And so we developed, I say we, I was a subcontractor for one of their subcontractors that handled the real estate portion. And so I kind of put together this system to identify um, these places that potentially would work really well for them to get a lot of land acquired, get leases on them, be able to construct their the wind farms, so to speak, right? We're talking the big industrial scale stuff, the big, they're typically white. They've got rotors that are 100 feet across or more. And, we finally got to a place where we'd worked together long enough where they started giving me more and more data about the output of the wind farm, right? And how much, megawatt hours it would produce in a given year, what the capacities of the different turbines were, because we fed all that into the model that I'd created to help them even understand more better. Some of my hillbilly talk there, understand more better the the opportunity, and then they could line up investors that they needed to be able to fund the projects, and everybody was kind of making money. But having all that data, what I began looking at was that yes, it was generating a lot of money, and these farms were getting produced, and the utility companies had restrictions, I guess, placed on them where they had to have a certain amount of capacity in their portfolio that was generating electricity. This is in the United States. I have a feeling that this is the way it is in other countries as well, although I don't have personal experience with that. So they essentially were having to get these things online to offset some of the carbon producing energy generation systems, which have mostly powered the industrial development of the United States up to this point. Right, we got some nuclear facilities here in the U.S., but not a lot. We've got hydro as well, so you can kind of buy from all of those sources if you're a utility company, and it's a kind of I'm kind of trying to gloss over some of these details because they can get this is actually kind of I've done a lot of like academic writing in this. So I've got a lot of citations and things like that. I don't want to get too dense with tonight, but it's going to tie back around to money. And so at a certain point, I kind of realized that someone was paying for these things, and they were the value they were being sold at didn't add up to the actual value of what I believed a dollar was. Right, money was either being extracted from taxpayers or citizens of not even just citizens, people who owned U.S. dollars, because we continue to print more money. This past year in 2020, a lot more currency got printed, and so I kind of started to do was to say, you know what, there's something here I don't understand, right? And I didn't really understand finance. I don't claim to still. But I also then questioned what I knew about economics, and I'd actually studied a decent amount of economics in my undergraduate program, and so I chose to enroll in graduate program at Harvard to study economics and sustainability, right? Because it was something I just really needed to try to wrap my brain around and try to resolve some of these contradictions. And so I wound up studying a bunch about negative externalities and some other technical terms about economics. But really, when you think about them, it doesn't really make much sense. And at that point, I was really questioning, like, okay, so what's real about money? Like, how do I even know what's true about money? But what I do know is that this system is I've seen enough problems with it that it's not really what we think it is. I say all of us. That might not be true for everyone, but commonly, I don't think many people have resolved to understand money properly. And so at that point, I left after a semester and wanted to go be a goat farmer, right? And the reason that it kind of sounds funny, it's actually true. You can ask my parents. Um, I was like, that's something I know is true. It's something that's real, and it's something I need to live, and it's value I can trade. That's I was saying more honest, but I understood it. And that was shoot. That was probably 2008, give or take, which happened to be a massive economic turmoil in the United States and even worldwide, because there was the economic crash with real estate. There were all these things called bubbles, right, in the financial markets. A lot of people lost a lot of money, lost a lot of their property, their real property, because it got taken back by the people who owned the note on it, the lien, so to speak, with money that they had lent out. And at that point, I kind of went almost into this world that a lot of people would call like conspiracy theory things. There's a documentary called Zeitgeist that kind of lays some of this stuff out. There's a book called Creature from Jekyll Island that lays out how the banking system was really set up as a cartel in the United States and all this kind of thing. And so I began digging more and more and more into those resources. And it really wasn't until much later than that kind of got put aside, because I wound up um, kind of like broke, and then I made a bunch of money, and then I was broke and I made a bunch of money. And then I started making a lot more money online, and also came across training that a man named David Mills put together called Alchemy. And Alchemy had at its core, one of the things it would build on, and really one of the only things it would build on like properly, is properly understanding what's true and then building on that as a building block. So he also introduced several other concepts that I'm going to talk about today kind of briefly. This is something that I've done a lot more work on. I've got a info course, so to speak, ebook, may turn into an actual book, that I've got a couple chapters on this, and kind of some of the things that I've come to realize. But one of those concepts that David introduced me to was understanding a stable base, right? Having a stable base, and then from there, working on the win, right? The win with money being when you no longer need money from someone else to live. You don't have to trade. You don't have to trade value on their terms for them to give you money back. And there's I think, very sound plan and concept for how to do that, right? You can make enough money where you can put it in certain accounts and investment vehicles and pieces of insurance that can guarantee that you can live out the rest of your days, however long you live, with some degree of income from those assets that are producing and kicking off some interest payments to you on a monthly basis, right? And so it kind of seems reasonable to shoot for that. But I say in the back of my head, it was really, I tried to keep it in the back of my head, but it kept coming to the forefront, which is, yeah, but what if we go through some kind of hyperinflation event, right? Which is not unprecedented. It's happened a lot in modern history in other places in the world when they got into weird financial and economic situations. 2020 has been a weird economic and financial situation for a lot of people. And what we saw was the printing of a lot of currency, which devalues everything that you have liquid, and kind of inflates the value of everything that you have that is kind of free and clear, so to speak, meaning that there is not a lien against it that can change it, as far as the amount of that lien goes. So how much money you owe for your house, for instance. So what I started doing was looking at stable base from like let me only build on what I know. And about that time, I was also kind of going through some stuff physically that I've talked about, with some concussions and my health just going really haywire. And I say bad choices just because they felt like the right choice at the time, but as I look back, it was like, man, that I was just trying to get by. I was, doing things that I knew were not necessarily going to lead to a good place, but I was just really trying to survive and tread water. And so I researched some, came across some ideas that I hadn't really thought of very properly since, like, I was a little kid and read the Bible, and it talked about fasting and going into the wilderness. I'd read about a lot of Native American cultures who had kind of vision quests and going out to, clear your mind and cleanse your spirit, and figure out what it is to then take on your role in the society that you were part of. And so I started doing fasts, Like in the traditional sense, I guess, in the most common use of that term, we would just not eat. And so I went with kind of water only and did that. And within a few days, things felt very different. I say felt different, meaning that the world looked different and my place in it looked very different. And so from there, I did that a couple times, and then I said, I'm also now going to try to turn off as much other inputs as possible, and did what I do now. When I do a fast, I typically try to minimize, if not completely eliminate, inputs that are unnecessary in my life. And necessary for me, I've got interactions with my business because I've got responsibilities to those partners that I more properly understand now. So I've got to do some communication via email or via text or phone calls, but I try to minimize it at that. I do not watch television. I try to not have the radio on if I'm needing to drive someplace to get groceries or something like that. I talk to my family. I interact with my kids, and through that experience, I began realizing that stable base is having food enough to live on, right? To live well enough on, and and water and air. And then if you're not sleeping, one of the things that had happened over, oh gosh, well, since 2008, I haven't really slept very well. Up until this past year when I got some of these things figured out, I began sleeping very well. And there's no way to really, well, I don't know how to easily convey how much of a difference that made in my life. And so at that point, what I then began starting to look at is like stable base is really what it takes to live on. So if you can accomplish that with money and money in the bank and in investments that can kick you off enough money where you can go to the grocery store and that's how you want to live, that's great. But there are things that can happen even if you think you're set up forever. Your 401k gets wiped out because the stock market goes upside down and that was the vehicle you were in mostly, and now you're looking at 20 more years of work at least. And salaries don't tend to go up quite as fast as some of the prices that we experience in the world. And so at that point, I kind of started looking at calling stable base, from my own personal experience and proclivities and abilities, more like homestead, right? And I'm not necessarily only talking about living out completely by myself off grid, but what I was looking at is, well, the price of energy is going up 13, 14% per year. Is your salary, if you're working? No. Well, that means over time, more and more of your salary is going to go toward paying energy bills. So we've been looking at ways to minimize energy use as well as maximize energy production through things that we own, solar panels, for instance, or wind turbines that we own, right, that are plugged into us. And looking at food, and I grew up in Missouri and then in Colorado in communities that were, ranching, and you call it farmers, but people that had livestock as well as grew food. So I began looking at like, okay, well, I can get there with money, but I know that I have hangups with money because I know what can happen. I'm still in some sort of jeopardy with that. But if I can procure my own food, and I have a well for water, and air pollution doesn't get to the point where I can't exchange the oxygen for the CO2, I've got a problem. But there's really nothing I can do to control that, much like there's not much I can do to control how much money the Fed prints every month, right, or every year. So I began looking at that kind of stable base concept from the perspective of really like stable base, like what does it take for you to live, right? And I include in that relationships, because I think as humans we're very social. I myself like to have relationships with some people, and so keeping those relationships up with a small community, I think, is a piece of living well that I don't want um, to give up. I don't want to go live by myself in a cave. But what I realized is, hunting and fishing are they were very much a part of kind of how I grew up in the communities I was in. So I started like really running numbers and realizing that I'm not that far from being done. Like, I say that far, there's not that much distance financially from me being done needing money forever, as if I had tried to earn enough money to put them into vehicles where they would always kick me off money. I'm not saying that there's not great ways of doing that. That is part of kind of the plan that I have currently. But then what that made me look at really is the culture and the way that we all live and the way that that money works is really a little bit more like a game where there are a lot of things going on really behind the scenes, behind the screen, that we don't really know everything about. And there's not really a way, like even people who program complex games, they work on parts of it. They don't maybe understand some of the other, intelligence and algorithms that are written into other pieces of the game. So they don't even understand completely how their own game works. It works, especially when you're on the other side and you become completely immersed in the character you're playing. Right. I like role playing games, first person shooters, what are called strategy games, those types of things. I don't really know much about what's behind them, but I can pay attention to what I do and the result I get. And the more immersed I get into those situations, Mike Long and David actually ran a webinar where they're actually playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is a game that I grew up playing and loved. But it was kind of at that point, and I'm talking pretty recently, which is why I'm talking about this topic today, where I realized that there's a lot about kind of the modern life that we lead that is much more like a game than I ever realized. Meaning that it really is a character that I'm playing and that is being shown to me a lot based on things that I don't understand. And so as this series kind of progresses, I'm going to be talking, I won't say more and more, but this is going to be a component, is understanding the game, right? Some of the other series, like I look back now and I can appreciate whether or not it was the case that David named some of the series that he put together, such as Rigging the Game and Crushing the Game. And what he's really talking about is how well we live and how well we succeed. And I really, for some reason, was a little bit blind, quite a lot blind, to the fact that lots of this stuff that we would, I guess, consider success, other people would consider successful about what we do, that is very, very, very much game like. And so, what I wanted to do was to kind of introduce that concept through my own words, my own experience, and at least help to start conversations about understanding your stable base and understanding then this game as separate things, right? There are ways you can use the game to improve your stable base or even completely nail it. But if you rely only on the game to give you your stable base, I think you're going to have some real challenges. And it doesn't mean people won't win the game, so to speak, but it's going to be a lot more based on luck, right? Whether how they walk into it with a lot of the right connections and the right last name, and they're born in the right country, speaking the right language, and they can get to a place where they've got, $10 million or $100 million or $1 million. And so all those things are a little bit arbitrary, but they're very much based on luck. They're not really things we control at the onset. What we really then need to do is to start looking at building blocks that we can build on properly that give us advantages in this game, right? And so feeling somewhat refreshed and starting anew in being able to communicate these things, it was secondary to beginning to pull on these threads and not just ignoring a contradiction or a piece of my experience that I could not understand was not a contradiction. And so contradictions they don't exist. They exist in our mind, right? We can hold two things that can't be true possibly in our mind and believe them both at the same time, right? But one of them is false, whether it's the representation that we have of them, meaning that we need to understand it more properly. But really, then when understanding it more properly, we realize it's not a contradiction, right? There were some things that we wound up experiencing or seeing that are not really how things are. And then also, some things that we've been told or that we live by or we think is our identity, right? But it's more about the character in the game right now than it is about, like, I say us. There's almost the Matrix, I'm not saying is right, but there's a lot of elements that kind of point in pretty interesting directions. And so it's kind of like you're in the game, and then Neo gets unplugged, and he realizes, like, wait, I'm not in the game. But then he realizes he's in a different game. And so there's a couple levels of the game that we're talking about. We're talking about the game that is outward success, how well you do, and that's the game that we need to understand value as a core, because that's what we trade back and forth, value. We trade it for dollars a lot of times, but we also trade it with relationships, um, influence, and all of these things that kind of come, sometimes packaged along with it. And until we kind of pull those apart and understand them more properly, we're kind of loaded with vagueness that can really cause us problems if we don't know that every single time we do this, it's good and it's going to work, or it's not going to work. And then we can be curious about why it didn't work, and then take that apart a little bit and understand, oh, wait a second. I really wasn't doing the exact same thing. I was doing something similar, but in some way it was different. And then that difference, you can then start to kind of run a test to either understand or try each of those and see which one is more effective and works, right? And then you can know more properly what to be doing, right? So we're coming up on an hour. I don't want to run the whole hour tonight, but this is a concept that I did want to get out there as kind of where I currently am as far as my understanding of things go, and the things that I'm working on, because what this seems to be um, doing, and I'm using those words kind of carefully, and obviously words mean whatever they mean to you, right? But I'm trying to use seems, meaning that the feelings that I have now about playing the game are more about playing the game and being able to win it. Like, I'm here to win, right? David, I think that was the first words that came out of his mouth the first time I heard him speak live at one of the OMG live events in Franklin, Tennessee, back in, oh gosh, 2013, I guess. And at the time it was like, oh yeah, I've heard people say that before, but I didn't understand the nature of how much he understood to be able to say that properly, right? And so what I want to revisit and get to is a place where I'm I'm here to win as well, and I want to help other people understand that they need to show up in the capacity necessary to win. And the only way to do that is to understand, right? To continue to seek understanding until you get to that place. So as we kind of continue forward, I'm going to be talking about stable base. And what I mean by that really is a stripped down bare, what does it take you to live? And, I certainly can't offer medical advice, but telling somebody that they might want to do a fast, there's no medicine involved there, right? Look into it yourself. But I do know that when I turned off media, I tried not to interact. Like, I can't drive 3 minutes in any direction of my house, and like, there's people that still have political signs all up and down the street, right? And those affect me, right? There's every sign for every business and restaurant that's up. Every street intersection is telling you to either, stop or turn or caution or what. Like, there's just all these like signals, and our brain really doesn't process things that it doesn't process that much data that's coming in from the outside world. Once it's in there, your brain can do amazing things with it. But there's a lot of filters in place that say, hey, all you need to do right now is to be able to pay attention to not running into, somebody that stopped in front of you. And I'll be able to, the brain can take over operation of driving. So we can drive and listen to the radio and, hear if somebody else in the car needs to say, I got to go to the bathroom, or could you, also get this when you go into the store, whatever it might be, right? You're, oh, pardon me. Tried not to cough into the microphone, but I may have blasted things there for a second. Um, and so what I really have been working on doing over these last, well, kind of your whole life, but I didn't really have a great method and heuristic for accomplishing that, was getting out of my brain all the stuff that it was constantly working on that was already in there that wasn't accurate. And that's really about kind of dissolving contradictions, seeking understanding, and getting rid of those failure conditions. And the other series that I'm running with Glenn Ingram, who's one of my business partners in a company that we have, we've been kind of tackling that, um, the angle that I kind of chose to take with that are limiting factors in your business, right? And so a limiting factor is understanding things outside of the direct thing it looks like you're doing each and every day, like from a perspective of search engine optimization, which is one of the things I do online to make money with. It feels like a lot of times getting better and better at SEO, learning more SEO is the right way to grow your business. But that's only true to a certain extent. If you don't have enough of some of these other factors in place, or you haven't addressed them properly, no amount of search engine optimization that you have is going to necessarily help you win the game better unless you address systems of implementation of your knowledge, right? If you're running an agency, if you don't have enough leads coming in, if you are running an agency, you don't have a sales process and system in place that you can really understand properly so that you can come to find out the customers that you should work with and communicate with them in such a way where they understand it as well. And then also then, several other things that we've covered in that series. So with money, one of the things that a lot of us try to do is to just go out and grab money, right? And try to, I say build, right? Build more income. And what I found to be the case um, is that looking in the context, looking in the environment, looking at other things that are not about just grabbing more money, that seems like it's there and you should be able to just get it if you get better at SEO, for instance. Um, well, looking at my construction company, right? My construction company, which is what I was doing in Phoenix when effectively one of the sources of leads that I had went away, and I then was left with no leads. I had to go online and try to figure out, well, I need to have more customers coming in. Well, within a year of that, my construction company revenue, because everything was still flowing through that when I was selling leads to my subcontractors, it it went up by a factor of 50, like 50x. And I didn't get any better at construction, right? I got better at handling one of the systems I had for generating leads, right? And then also then of monetizing that, also not related to construction, right? That was more related to sales. So so these are some of the things that I want to help people consider. I'm going to be tackling the kind of the inherent contradictions and limiting factors and more properly representing money and income. Um, Not just myself, but I want to also share this with people because I know it affects a lot of folks. I've talked and worked with enough people in a coaching and training and teaching capacity in not just online, but with sports, with friends I have who are chatting it up about their relationships or whatever. And I'm not saying I'm qualified to do anything else, but what I realize, it's like the default thing we come back to, like all too often, is work harder. And it's that's not that that's the wrong answer, but we need to know what to work on to properly engineer conditions such that we succeed, right? To get the field that we're planting things in prepared so that the things grow naturally. They grow on their own almost, right? My income with construction grew on its own once I knew to address my lead generation and then consequently my sales of that product, that asset. Those phone calls, those say the phone calls, they were people. I was helping connect people. That's what I got paid for. So we're going to kind of explore money more as Fletcher's Garage series goes on. It's very much related to the work I'm doing with Glenn Ingram and Mike Hayden and Web Alley as well. But this again is something that I'm a little curious as to whether or not people are at a place where this makes any sense to them, or this is really something that's affecting them in their own life. So, I would love to have a comment below the video on Facebook, just because that's going to help that video actually, because of the algorithm, get in front of more people. But I also understand some of this is kind of personal. So, if you want to just drop a comment of like understand money or something, like something about that, it'll help me feel um, more inclined to continue doing work like this and publishing it, as opposed to more inwardly processing it myself and using it to improve my own situation in really winning that game, as well as the secondary game, which is kind of stable base and homestead, right? So I think that's going to be about it for tonight. It's about 40 minutes in. I really appreciate everybody's time. I hope that what I've shared with you as far as value goes has been worth the time that you invested and shared with me tonight in watching this. And I've got some other webinars this week, not Fletcher's Garage, but very much along these same lines. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking with Glenn on a webinar about sales. You can drop me a comment or a message in Facebook if you're not yet on the notification list for that. And then on Sunday, we're going to be talking about something that I was really blind to as well until very recently, which is onboarding. Um, when you get onboarding nailed with whatever you're doing, and if you're listening to me, you probably, there's at least some concept of what like running an SEO agency or a marketing agency or a digital marketing agency is, and having that onboarding process figured out lets you then sell appropriately. It also lets you generate leads appropriately, right? And then we kind of put all those together with a concept of kind of understanding systems and what they're about and why they're so important in addressing these limiting factors in your own business, right? So that's all I've got for you tonight. I hope you had a very happy Thanksgiving wherever you might be in the world. It's a day that we celebrate here in the U.S. Um, that's kind of come to be about being grateful and kind of reflecting. And I am definitely grateful for the things that I've experienced and people I've met and the things that they have helped me see in my time here so far. So blessings to you and yours, and I'll talk to you on the next webinar. Take care. Talk soon. Bye.